Member for Morialta, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Minister. I'll move to Budget Paper 3, page 23-24, which talks about operating expenses. There is a, well, let's call it a lot of variance today of $387 million in operating expenses between the 22-23 budget and the estimated result. And that increase continues over the forward estimates. Over the page, on page 24, it's described as an increase of $381.7 million, and it says that it is, and I quote, mainly due to higher indexation applied to the schooling resource standard base amount and loadings under the National School Reform Agreement. So the word mainly is carrying a lot of weight there. So I have some questions that follow. Maybe if I can ask the first three questions at once, and I'll unpack them if the answer is missed. So firstly, can you explain the detail of how we're now applying a higher indexation to the SRS? How has that worked out, and how much of the variance is directly as a result of that? And can you please clarify whether it's $381 million as it says on page 24 or $387 million as it looks like on page 23?
Thank you, Member for Morialta. Happy to do that. Perhaps I can make just some very brief introductory remarks and then pass over to Chris Bernardi, who, as you well know, is the expert on these things. I think I don't want to put words in Mr Bernardi's mouth, but I think some of this will come down to issues around timing and carryovers of money, and I'll accept the point that the member for Morialta has made about the two different figures, one on page 24 of $381.7 million and then the other figure. I might pass over now to Mr Bernardi to provide you a bit more detail and try to answer the three questions that you've asked.
Thank you. So one of the questions that I wrote down was in terms of indexation. So we are funded for education activities. We're funded in accordance with the National Schools Resource Agreement, which is commonly known as Gonski. There's the Gonski model, or the Commonwealth's funding model, will determine, they've got a methodology for calculating the indexation, which is provided to us through Treasury processes. The indexation, I'll have to take some parts of this question on notice and come back. The indexation is determined based on goods and services CPI and national wage type index, but I'll have to come back with the specific details about how that calculation works out. So that indexation is passed on to us via the Gonski model from the Commonwealth, and what I'll need to do further is that the growth factors is impacted by timing adjustments as well. So I'll need to come back to you with specific details about what's driving each of the indexation numbers in there, but I can say that through Treasury processes, government processes, we are provided with the indexation that comes through the Gonski agreement. So if I can summarise, a large part of this then is due to the impact of inflation on the Gonski indexation model, is that correct? How that Gonski model works out those rates, yes. That's helpful, thank you. So if the figure is mainly due to indexation with potentially some timing adjustments as well, are there any other contributing factors to what we're calling a variance for the sake of this committee? Yep. So earlier you referred to a variance of $381.7 million, which is the increase in operating expenditure for the department over the period 22-23 estimated result to the 26-27 budget. In terms of some more detail, that includes growth in programs. For example, investments announced in the 23-24 state budget relating to the expansion of the school breakfast program and funding the Smith family for the students undertaking the Learning for Life program in government schools, funding for the government's election commitments for autism support in schools, 5 new technical colleges, mental health and learning support in schools, the mid-year intake. We have that salary of goods and services indexation coming through the Gonski model. We've invested in significant amounts in infrastructure, so depreciation is playing a factor. And so we've also got funding in there for supporting developmentally vulnerable children by increasing reach and frequency of early child development checks, health checks and related activities. One of the things we know is also across the forward estimates there's funding ceasing, funding coming to an end for national partnership agreements for Skills SA, but a new national skills agreement is currently being negotiated and will come into operation or plan to come into operation from the 2024 calendar year.
Can I ask if it's possible to get a breakdown of the contribution that each of those factors makes? Some of them are listed in Budget Paper 5, some of them were listed in Budget Paper 5 last year, some of them haven't been mentioned as separate budget measures but are contributing to the quantum.
So I can do that, yep.
Thank you. And actually, can I go back to that initial question of, did we ever get to the bottom of why it's $381 million on one page and $387 million on the other page?
I would need to come back to that.
I blame Treasury, just for the record.
I'm not sure it's a mistake. I won't say it's a mistake. I'll have to come back with that detail.
Can I ask, appreciate that probably the most significant contribution to the increase may well be inflation impacting the indexation rate, but the department has $381 or $387 million more expended last year than the budget was. So I guess, is all of that $380 odd million explained by the list that Mr Bernardi just read out, or are there other programs or uses to which that money has been put?
Again, when I come back with that question on notice, we manage a significant budget, over $4 billion per annum, so there will always be timing variations and other smaller variations and other variations. So when I come back, I'll give you what we're saying is predominantly the factors relating to that variance.
Thank you. Minister, and it's still relevant to the same budget line, but what's the status of negotiations of the National School Funding Agreement with the Commonwealth? And without asking to say when there might be a press conference, are we talking something we'll expect within days, weeks, months, this Friday?
Yes. Well, I hope to be there tomorrow and Friday, because it's the Education Minister's meeting across those 2 days, and the big ticket item, as you pointed out, Member for Morialta, is the next National School Reform Agreement, or Gonski. I wouldn't say announcement in days, no. Still a fair bit of work to be done. I have recently made some public remarks, probably didn't win me fans in all quarters, about the need to get public schools to 100% of the schooling resource standard, given that they are not there. Mr Bernardi can correct me if I am wrong, but I think that additionality, as we used to call it, is worth to the South Australian system in the vicinity of $190 million per year if we get there. And as a former minister, you all know well all the good things we could do with that extra funding. So negotiations are underway. It will be the item of most discussion and debate tomorrow and Friday. And I would say we are not probably days or weeks is probably the best indication I can give you of when we might have some kind of announcement.
The Education Union, amongst others, have argued that not only is there a suggestion that there should be up to 5% more provided by the Commonwealth to help get to the 100%, an option is for the state to provide more. I think that obviously the Commonwealth has more money, but the state also, some have argued, has 4% of the SRS to which it is allowed to apply things like contributions to the SACE board and other regulatory bodies, contributions towards potentially depreciation, or some states talk about early childhood. Is the government contemplating offering to the Commonwealth a reduction in that quantum of 4% to boost the state contribution towards SRS?
Certainly it is a factor, but I haven't had any discussions with Treasury or my ministerial colleagues interstate to that effect at this stage.
Thank you. How are students who are entering reception mid-year being treated for the funding purposes by the state and by the Commonwealth?
I understand the point that you're getting at there, which is around some recent changes to how the federal government has accounted for the funding which flowed to the non-government sector, in particular the Catholic system, towards the mid-year intake that they have been operating for a number of years. It might be close to 10 now, I think, since the public system, in what was in hindsight, a poor move, removed mid-year intake, and we've been in very strong negotiations with the federal government and the federal education minister around why we don't believe that is fair, and have been united with the non-government sector around fighting to have that money reinstated, and we are still doing that. Those negotiations are still underway. I think maybe if I could preempt what your next question may be is around whether or not the state might have to step in if we can't. I would say that is something that we will consider if we have to, but I have not given up yet on being able to retain the money that the federal government has provided to both those systems over a number of years, because as you well know, it is a significant amount of money, and I think the option of mid-year intake for all students, regardless of what sector they are students in South Australia, is a good thing for families. And I have a lot of information which I won't go into now, though, about how much interest there has been in the mid-year intake for preschool, which kicks off in term 3, and then I think there'll be a lot of interest for the mid-year intake for reception next year too.
Thank you. The impact on non-government schools obviously will be significant, and I thank the Minister for his answer and his acknowledgement of that. What is the risk for the public school sector of the Commonwealth not funding the first 6 months of a student's reception in the public system when that starts next year? What's the financial risk?
Comments, Mr. Bernardi. There will be an impact if it is not maintained to the public system as well. There is no doubt about that, particularly given that we are obviously, and this is the point of your question, is that we are reintroducing an extra intake for preschool this year and reception next year. Like I said, I haven't at all given up on us being able to retain that money, but I might pass over to Mr Bernardi for a few more specific comments about that.
Thanks, Minister. So the state government funded the mid-year intake as part of last year's state budget, and the number from memory for the 6 months, the term 3 and 4 intake commencing 2024 for reception is around $27 million of state funding. We've been working on obviously this year with the mid-year intake into preschools this year, which was also funded as a once-off around $18 million or $18 million or thereabouts. So I think in terms of the detail about the cost of the term 3 and 4 impact, we'll be doing that work, and in terms of that question about affordability, I would have to take that on notice.
Briefly, that regardless of what happens, and as I said, I remain optimistic that we're going to be able to keep it. We're not going to give up on that, and as you and I both know, the Catholic system are strong advocates for their system and fearsome opponents. And they are fighting with us for this, but regardless, the election commitments we made around mid-year intake for preschool and reception, obviously we'll go ahead with preschool beginning in term 3 this year and reception beginning in term 3 next year.
Thank you. If I can just maybe ask one last question on this line and potentially summarise the challenge in a nutshell. As I understand it, we're talking about, for a number of years, Catholic education, a number of independent schools who have been operating a mid-year entry and 6 terms of reception. Those first 2 terms of reception have had contributions from the state and the Commonwealth according to the Gonski model. And the change, as I understand it, from the Commonwealth is that they're now only proposing to fund 1 year of reception and not the 18 months as they have been. So, as Mr Bernardi said, last year's state budget funded the new mid-year intake policy, the $17 million. That had, I assume, in it the underlying assumption that the Commonwealth would continue to fund reception for 6 terms if a student was doing 6 terms. So I guess Mr Bernardi may already have taken this part of the question on notice, but maybe we can be clear. What is the assumption in last year's budget on how much the Commonwealth contribution would be to the extra 2 terms of reception each year going forward? Notwithstanding that the Minister still hopes to keep that money.
Mr Bernardi might provide your response.
So the state budget papers last year reflected the cost to the state government. We would have worked out the number based on the Gonski model, and so therefore there would be a Commonwealth component which comes in as additional revenue offset by additional expenditure. So in terms of the value relating to the Commonwealth component, I don't have that with me. I'll have to take that on notice.
Thank you. I'll turn to Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, page 180, 181. For the benefit of the officers, there's some questions on infrastructure. And if I can invite the Chair to defer to the Member for Frome.
Member for Frome.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Minister. In relation to the line that the member for Morialta has just opened, or in reference on page 182, perhaps to capital works. But as you know, Minister, in late March last year, the Kapunda community as a whole, and particularly the staff and the students, were devastated to wake up to that tragic fire at Aringa at the Kapunda High School. Now in attendance was yourself, the Shadow Minister, and I was there as well, and we all spoke to the staff at the time. and they've done an extraordinary job. But with the rebuilding of Aringa, noting its historical significance to the community, not just the school fraternity, can you please update the House on the rebuild project, including funds committed and the timelines for that project?
Happy to, Member for Frome. Thank you for the question, and I'll begin by thanking you and the Shadow Minister for the way you have worked with both the community and with me as Minister to give me the space to try to get the best outcome for the community. And I have to say it was a learning curve for me, because I think I was 10 days into the job and got a call in the morning to say a high school had burnt down, which was not ever ideal. But as well as those calls, I had calls from Member for Taylor and Member for Ramsay. I think both were students there at some time who reinforced with me straight away the special nature of the Aringa building. And I didn't really appreciate that until I got there that morning and saw the enormous crowd, which I think I likened to a wake at the time, with people very upset. And it was great that you both made the time to be there as well. That's important. So I want to say from the outset, I do appreciate that, and I understand how important this building is, not only to the Kapunda community and the high school, but the state, in terms of the incredible history that was in there, that a lot of which we lost. But I can give you an update on where we're at, and I appreciate that these things are painfully slow, particularly when we're trying to access the state insurance that we have for things like this, but that is compounded by the incredibly unique nature of the building. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that when some more recent upgrade work was done there to bring it back to how Mrs. Kidman had the building, there were tiles that were actually created that didn't exist to match the ones that she had in there. So there's this incredible amount of work that has gone on to find what the cost would be to put that back in. But the community's been very patient, and I think it's good, because I'm confident now that what we're going to put back there is a complete replacement and what the school and the community deserve. I'll try to give you an update as best I can of where we're sort of up in that process. So we've got a master plan now for the restoration of both the Aringa building and the replacement of Building 14. That's by Grieve Gillett Architects, and it's being done in accordance with both the Education and Heritage SA requirements, which of course are very stringent, and so they should be when it comes to a building like this. What I'm told is that the advantage of that option is that it adds a sizable new staff area and toilet block that will be linked to the restored Aringa building, and I'm pretty sure from memory those buildings that weren't part of Aringa that were there probably weren't in fantastic shape. The kind of stuff we built back in the day, where we attached these almost shanties to pieces of heritage, makes you shake your head. I don't blame you for that, Ben. It's okay. It's before your time. The concept design is due imminently, which will be great, and I'll share that with both of you when I have that, and we can share it with the community to get feedback. So I'll give you that undertaking now. The current project program anticipates the tender and construction contract will be awarded by the end of this year, so not too far away now really, with the replacement of Building 14 being completed in Term 4 next year and Aringa completed in late 2025. The cost to restore and replace Building 14 is still being assessed, but early estimates are in the order of $24 million. The amount factors in the additional provisions to be included in the project, which I mentioned before in terms of some upgraded work. So, listen, that's sort of the broad brushstrokes of where we're at. I'm happy to take any more questions you have, but I'm confident that what we've done in terms of the work that Grieve Gillett has done, we're going to be able to, as best we can, replace what was there and also provide better spaces for and more modern spaces for the school as well. But like I said, when we get that concept design, which will be very soon, I'm happy to share that with you and the Shadow Minister, and we can do some work with the community if you would like to make sure they are happy, because there's a great deal of ownership from the community over the site, which is good. I know the end of 2025 might seem like a while away, but I'm pleased that what we are doing here is actually going to do the building and the community justice, I think, and as best we can replace a unique part of our history.
Thank you for that information. I look forward to the update.
Thanks.
So, I'm going to ask a question specifically on behalf of the member for Schubert, who is very interested, as the Minister knows, in Nuriootpa High School. As the Minister is aware, there have been significant challenges at Nuriootpa High School in recent times. Some dreadful incidents of bullying in particular have been reported. As I understand it, one of the recommended improvements at the school relates to the updating of all the toilet facilities. And I believe some work has begun. Can the Minister update the committee on the work done so far? Is there more work to come, and what other measures is the department looking at to fix the challenges at Nuriootpa High School?
Thank you, Member for Morialta, and in the absence of the Member for Schubert, I want to thank her in the same vein that I did the Member for Frome before, because she's a very proud former student of both Angaston Primary School and Nuriootpa, which is very impressive, I think. And I was really pleased that she joined me the other day. Well, it was at her invitation, really, to come along and spend time at the school communities and spend time talking to the school leaders there as well. And we all know when these kind of things happen at schools and you have this sort of negative attention around things that have happened. I'm not saying that some of it wasn't possibly warranted, but the whole school community hurts, and it's always good when you have members of Parliament from the other side of the aisle who are willing to work with you to get a good outcome for the school community, and that's what the Member for Schubert and you have done here, which is good, and I'm happy to go into what we're doing. So there are already toilets which have been dropped in there, a new modular toilet, which the Member for Schubert and I inspected. They are in the process of being hooked up. They are far and away better than the existing ones that are there, which I have to say aren't great. And the Member for Schubert and I spoke with the Principal, Jerry Walker, about, and I've since spoken to Mr Templey, who might add some comments to what I'm saying, about what we can do to get those new toilets hooked up as fast as we can. But also there are issues with vaping at the school. There are issues of vaping in lots of places, but I think in some sites it gets to the point where younger students are not comfortable using toilet blocks because older students are in there vaping, and the existing toilets at Nuriootpa High School are classic sort of, I think, probably 60s, 70s kind of jobs, which are not like the new stock that we put in now. So I've been talking to the department and Mr Templey around what we can do to offer a refurbishment of those as well, which is what was requested by both the Member for Schubert and the school community as well. There's other work we're doing there in terms of, and it's akin to the work we did at Golden Grove High School last year, in terms of adding some extra resources in, an extra sort of leadership position, some parent liaison work. The school is currently reviewing its bullying policy because I think the feedback from the parent community was they didn't think it was clear and wasn't always being applied consistently, so that is happening as well. The other thing I might point out that I observed when I was taking the tour with the Member for Schubert is the school actually has a very comprehensive CCTV setup, which is quite a modern one, but wasn't in all places operational for reasons that still remain unclear to me. And I've asked for that to be acted upon very quickly to make sure the school has access to that. You know, there are CCTV outside toilets and in different places where sometimes poor behaviour can occur. So I'm confident all those things taken into account, we can turn things around there and gain the support of, or regain the support of that part of the student and or more so the parent community that has felt like things have gone a little awry in some cases. But I might pass over to Mr Templey now, who will just talk about the process around what we do with that existing toilet block. That will cost money, as these things do. Mr Templey.
Yep, through you, Minister. So as the Minister mentioned, the priority currently is to get the modular toilet facilities connected to essential services as quickly as possible. So we imagine that at this stage is looking like sometime around the beginning of week 3 of next term, but there's current work happening to look at how we can fast track so that they're available even sooner. In terms of the existing toilet facilities, the Asset Services team have completed an initial desktop review to the condition of those facilities and the design, and there's a meeting on site at the school with the school principal this coming Friday to talk about the possible scope of the remediation work that will be done on the school toilets. The other investigations that are happening through the Infrastructure Division are on the installation of vape detectors. The utility of vape detectors is very contextual in terms of their suitability depending on the circumstance locally, so we'll explore that with the school leadership. And we're also, as the Minister mentioned, looking at the CCTV system in the school to make sure it's operating as it should.
Thank you. Last year, the Minister was good enough to take on notice a request to provide a budgeted expenditure for all projects for each year of the forward estimates, and that came through. Would the Minister be able to provide us again with such a list this year? Thank you very much. In relation to infrastructure, and we're still on the same pages, Chair, page 180 and 181, in which are listed all of the infrastructure investments. In relation to the voluntary mergers program, are there any schools currently who have expressed an interest in the program at the moment who are under consideration or at any stage in that process? And if so, which ones?
No problems. Member for Morialta, the answer at this stage is no, that there aren't any. There is obviously the closure of Geranium Primary School, which I visited recently, which doesn't have any students. The closure of Canalpin Primary School, which again didn't have any students. At the end of last year, the Moorook Primary School community voted in favour of amalgamating with Kingston on Murray Primary School. And all students have already successfully transitioned to their new school for the start of this school year, and we have commenced the closure process for Moorook. I think that's all.
Thank you. In relation to the Seaview Downs Primary School, which is listed third from the bottom, page 181, it's identified for a timeline of September 25, as opposed to the original completion date of December 2023 from previous papers. Can the Minister explain that delay?
Thank you, Member for Morialta. I might pass over to Mr Templey, who's had a longer association with this project than I.
So there are a number of reasons why the timelines for Seaview Downs has changed somewhat. So that was one of the projects that finalisation of the architectural services was pushed back as partly due to the Year 7 to High School program. One of the consequences of that was obviously the escalating building costs that occurred between the time that the project was announced and obviously current day has required us to engage in further scoping conversations with the school. But the predominant factors that are influencing the timeline for that project are discovery of significant asbestos content in the buildings that are being remodelled. And also the sequencing required, given it's such a large project, we have to stage the construction of the new buildings with the decommissioning of the old ones to ensure the school can still operate properly.
I note that in last year's budget there was an estimated result of $1.5 million for the 21-22 financial year. The budget had $8 million for 22-23 and $5.5 million for 23-24. This year's budget identifies $400,000 having been spent in 2022-23 and $14.6 million for the 23-24 year. What reassurance can you give the community that their school won't be delayed again past the September 25 quarter?
Now that we've finalised the scope and have a more concrete understanding of the building program as it relates to the operation of the school, we're confident in those timeframes. Having said that, there's a number of factors that ultimately influence the delivery of these projects, such as weather and other factors, but we are confident that we can meet those timelines.
I might add something if I can, from Morialta. Okay. All right, or I may not. Happy to hand back to you.
Pleased to have your input, sir. Can the Minister explain the delay in the rebuild of the Pimpala Primary School? $12 million originally intended for completion in December 2023 and now listed for September 2025.
Yes, we've got some detail on that for you as well. I'll again hand over to Mr Templey to talk about Pimpala Primary School.
Yeah, the factors impacting on the Pimpala delivery dates are much the same as Seaview Downs. So again, significant asbestos content discovered in existing buildings, and the requirement to engage in additional scoping conversations with the school due to escalating building costs.
These discoveries of asbestos at these two schools, were these in buildings or site rooms that were not previously identified on the department's asbestos register?
I'll have to take that on notice to provide an exact answer.
And I'd welcome the Minister's thoughts on his confidence in that asbestos register, depending on the answer to that question. Is the Minister able to identify, the budget for Pimpala last year, it was an estimated result of $1.2 million having been spent in the 21-22 year, and $8 million last year, so $9.2 million to have been spent by June 30 this year. This year's budget suggests that far from $9.2 million having been spent, it was $400,000 that has been spent. Can I ask what happened to the $1.2 million that was supposed to have been spent in the 21-22 year, or is that being accounted for differently?
Pass to Ben Templey, Mr Templey.
So through you, Minister, those revised cash flows reflect the delays that we were just talking about. The cash flows that are put in the budget papers are estimates based on how we understand the project will play out. So in circumstances where there are delays, those cash flows will change. I understand that for any delayed capital works projects, to go to your question about the $1.2 million from the previous financial year would be carried over to support the project being delivered in the coming years.
And September 2025 is listed in the budget paper. Can the students and families at Pimpala, in your view, have some confidence that it will be completed on time for that time frame?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. Similar questions in relation to Nailsworth Primary School, a $5 million project. Last year's budget suggested there was $700,000 having been spent and $3.5 million for this year and $800,000 for the year to come. The delay is from June 2023 to March 2025. This is a smaller project than the other two. Can the Minister explain the delay, and is there any reassurance that the Nailsworth primary community can have that the new listed date is the final offering?
Yes, happy to answer that question, Member for Morialta. The answer is similar to the previous two that Mr Templey has given, and the information I have from the department is that protracted delays in the engagement of architectural services due to the finalisation of projects for the Year 7 to High School program have caused the delays, but I am reassured that Nailsworth, as is the case with Pimpala and
Seaview Downs.
Seaview Downs, can have confidence in the dates that we are projecting now.
The protracted delays as a result of the Year 7 to High School project has been identified in relation to all three of these schools. Given that the budget for these three schools was provided in the middle of 2021, towards the end of when the Year 7 to High School process was happening, and indeed the contracting of builders, I don't believe, was intended to start for any of these until after Year 7s were in high school. Is the Minister talking about the large volume of schoolworks more generally that were on the books already, or is there something specific about Year 7 that was starting after the 2022 school year that we've missed?
Pass over to Mr Templey, member for Morialta, who will give us an answer to that question.
It's partly both. So obviously the Year 7 building program was probably the most ambitious building program that the department had undertaken at that time. So there are a number of decisions that we had to make in order to prioritise that work and to get that work done. And in some cases, such as the examples that we've talked to at the moment, it has led to a delay in the engagement of the architects and other services required to get the building started in those schools.
All right. So we're talking about this period between July and December 2021 where the focus was on finalising those Year 7 projects. You're saying that work that would have been done by staff was instead, in engaging some of that early work, was pushed out for a few months?
That's correct.
But not a year and a half?
That's true.
Thank you. In relation to Roma Mitchell Secondary College, listed on page 181, that's listed for completion in December 2024. It's a $21 million project identified for significant extra student numbers that are anticipated to come there, not necessarily in 2024, but certainly in the years ahead. It's a delay from March 2024 originally, 9 months, not as long as some of the others, but nevertheless on a significant project. Can the Minister explain that delay?
Thank you, Member for Morialta. I'm informed that the commitment for Roma Mitchell was always to have it ready for the start of Term 1 2025 and that we are on track still to do that.
All right, so the original March 2024 was optimistic, but December 2024 meets the needs of the project?
That is correct.
Okay, that's good news. Adelaide Botanic High School has a more urgent time frame. Will the third tower at Adelaide Botanic High School be ready for the beginning of next year's school year?
Thank you, Member for Morialta. And obviously this is a very significant project that had bipartisan support from both parties before the last state election, and an important project that I think it is fair to say had an ambitious timeline from the start, made more difficult by the negotiations that we had to undergo with the now former Adelaide City Council, who were somewhat reticent to provide the licence to build and agreed to the land swap, despite the fact that I thought it was an exceptionally good deal for the Adelaide City Council and one that I'm pleased they eventually acquiesced to. I am reminded that the contractual completion date is still February of next year. That will be very tight. There is a possibility that will be delayed. Exactly what that delay could be is not 100% clear at this point, because as you would remember with Morialta Secondary College and the delay we had there, it wasn't until much closer to the projected completion date that we had clarity from the builder, and in this case it's Lendlease, about when that date would be. So regardless of what the completion date will be, and I will have clarity on that, I hope, later this year. I can tell you that we are, I have met personally not only with Dean Brown on a number of occasions, but we have met together with the builders to discuss what is happening. We are working on, obviously, contingency plans around if we have to accommodate students somewhere else until the build is complete, where we do that. I understand those negotiations are still underway, but I'm confident that soon we will have a CBD location that is a educational institution locked in as an option should we need it for Year 11 and 12 students only to spend some time there if they need to until the build is complete and they can enjoy what will be, I'm sure, an incredible new build at Adelaide Botanic High School. But I remain hopeful that we can catch up some time. Should that not happen, we are very well advanced in having something appropriate and fit for purpose for senior students to be at, should that not be the case for the start of term 1 next year.
So with Morialta Secondary College, which the Minister referenced in his answer, it was fortunate this year when there were building works that were delayed there as a result of extraordinary rains last year, that the McGill campus of UniSA was available for those first 4 weeks of term, and particularly because uni students don't start their studies until later in the year. There were no uni students there to get in the way of the Year 7 students at Morialta. Is it anticipated, the contingency plan that the Minister is anticipating that may or may not need to be put into use next year, have we got a time frame on how long we're negotiating with whatever educational institution it might be across the road? And in particular, is it anticipated that a plan might be needed past the start of March when the uni students go back?
Member for Morialta, the site that we are negotiating on would provide availability for us beyond March, should we need it. Does that answer your question? I'm happy to provide more if I can and if you wish.
How far beyond March?
Well, I'm not giving the answer in a way of foreshadowing or forecasting what the delay could be, just what we are able to get from the site that we are looking at. There'll be more than enough to cover any delay, and it won't be impacted by university students coming back.
The Minister identified there would be an opportunity for Year 11 and 12 students to use alternate facilities for the period before the third tower is complete, which has a certain logic to it. The current site at Adelaide Botanic, as I recall, has a capacity for about 1,200 students, or
that's correct.
Okay,
No,
so and the
12,
new building is an extra 700, which aren't anticipated to be full on day one. But how many students over and above the 1,200 are we expecting there to be next year at Adelaide Botanic High School?
That's a good question. Somewhere between 120 and 200, depending on enrolments.
So the Minister got a updated expected enrolments over the next 6 years at Adelaide Botanic and Adelaide High School?
I might take that on notice. Happy to come back to the member for Morialta on that.
Thank you. And has the Minister had any advice from the Department in relation to longer-term needs for CBD schools, and in particular sites that might be in question, whether that be the Keswick Barracks or the ABC building at Collinswood or Hampstead Rehabilitation Centre or others?
I am advised that we expect the additional capacity being built at Adelaide Botanic High School, and as you correctly pointed out, 700 will see us through to the medium, if not the long term, is the hot off the press advice I have from the department.
Has that include a reassurance that the specialty programs at Adelaide High and Adelaide Botanic High, which includes 60 students for language specialisation at Adelaide High, 30 for sports at Adelaide High, and I think 20 for health sciences at Adelaide Botanic per year, in addition to the Enter for Success program for children under guardianship and Aboriginal students, would be able to be maintained at present levels throughout the forward period?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. We'll go to budget paper. Well, actually, we can. There are 3 budget lines that talk about the next set of questions I have. Budget paper 5, page 26, which talks about government schools and preschool upgrades. Budget paper 3, page 31, talks about capital investment by agency. And for ease, let's go to budget paper 3, if we all want to read from the same page. This initiative, budget paper 5 talks about the 100 million over 4 years for upgrades at government schools and preschools, and I know the government did media on this at the time. So I'll go to budget paper 5, page 26. There's $74.5 million in expenditure identified, of which $54.5 million has been taken from the 26-27 year and reprofiled into other years. So is the 20 million difference between the 26-27 reprofile and the 74.5 total, is that 20 million difference new money, or was some of it already allocated to education within its capital investment budget?
He's just going to find the needle in the haystack for us. Could we perhaps pop to the next question and give Mr Barney time just to find that, and happy to come back.
Thank you. In relation to the budget paper 3, page 31, there is $30 million $790,000 listed under 26-27. Has that been allocated to specific projects, or is some of it still unallocated?
Reference again, sorry, Member.
Budget paper 3, page 31, the general government capital investment by agency. It lists how much is anticipated to be actually expensed. So we've got the remainder of the school buildings, the technical colleges over the next few years, and then in 2026-27, the expenditure drops dramatically to $30,719,000. And I'm not asking if that $30 million has been allocated to projects yet, or is that unallocated money within education's forward budget?
We now have the answer to the previous question. If we could go back to that, and then we can come back to the second one. New money. Sorry, Mike. The $20 million, Member for Morialta, is new money, is my advice for Mr Bernardi.
Thank you. So,
would you like us to answer your other one, or?
Well, let me ask one in the middle. So, the new money is the 20, and the $80 million, sorry, the other $54.5 million was reprofiled. While we're on this budget paper 3, page 31, this $30 million figure here, can I just clarify that without the reprofiling of that $54 million in this year's budget measure, would that have appeared as $85 million rather than 30? And then the subsequent question is this $30 million allocated or not yet? all good.
Mr Bernardi will provide you an answer, Member for Morialta.
So through the Minister, in our forward capital investment budget, we do have uncommitted capital, not aligned to a specific project, but I would need to come back with the reconciliation with reference to this line that's referred to on page 31.
So it could be that that $30 million is the tail end of some projects, and in addition to that, it includes unallocated capital as well?
Potentially, yes. Yep.
And you'll get that
And I'll
detail.
come back to you on notice. Yep.
Thank you. Is there, we've discussed in previous years that there is an expectation, I think it's 60 or 70, or it might be more, $1 million that Treasury puts into education for assumed capital projects going forward. So for 27-28, well, maybe, what is the annual input from Treasury into that in future years? I assume it just goes up by indexation?
Member for Morialta, it goes up by indexation. The amount is around 60-ish million dollars, but we can come take it on notice and provide you with a more specific
That'll be
answer,
helpful.
if that's okay.
So in relation, going back to budget paper 5 and the new projects, how were the schools that are set to benefit from these investments selected?
So which projects?
Budget paper 5, page 26, talks about $100 million over 4 years for upgrades, capital works for a number of projects which are urgent and I assume were provided by the department. Then there's the gyms, and then there's the assets at 50 metropolitan regional schools and preschools. How were those sites selected?
Yeah, thank you, Member for Morialta. Happy to answer that question. So one cohort were election commitments that were made before the last state election, and I'm sure you'd be familiar with those projects, and I would like just to add, of course, that the department supported those projects. That was the advice I was given in writing by the department after coming to government. In terms of the extra money that has been added in this budget towards those election commitment projects, they were also supported by the department, but the other projects separate to that all came off the department's priority list, and that list was unchanged or untouched by.
So the priority list, am I to take it that the first list of $65 million for investing expenditure, that list is the one you're saying was provided by the department, and the government neither added to nor subtracted from the priority list from the department?
That's correct.
And the $10 million for school gyms are to deliver election commitments that were funded last year according to Labor's election promise. Am I to take it from that the department's advice this year has been that the Labor Party's election promises were going nowhere near delivering what the promises were, so this $10 million was necessary to deliver those projects in full?
I wouldn't accept that characterisation.
Would we call it a blowout?
No, we would not call it a blowout.
Why not?
Let me explain why not. So yes, extra money has been put in to make sure what was committed to at those schools or sites that received an election commitment. It was to make sure that what was promised could be delivered, as has been the case with a whole range of projects, and I've got a list somewhere. We've had a lot of pressure because of an increase on materials and labour, and there's a whole range of projects that I've committed extra money to meet the original scope, and that is true of these projects as well. Yes, and I think I understand that accounts for the money that we have put in. So I don't accept that it's a case of us just the blowout or getting the calculations wrong, but we are in an unprecedented kind of situation at the moment, and you certainly experienced it in your time as well. Global increases in the cost of materials, and we have to either make a decision at all these sites around either changing scope and providing or delivering less than what was promised, or putting extra money into projects and making sure that we deliver what was intended and promised. And I've done that, or doing that, not only at those sites that you identify that were election commitments by the then opposition, now government, but a whole host of sites in areas that aren't held by government members of parliament as well, regional areas, to make sure as best we can we deliver what people were or communities were originally promised.
Minister, in fairness, I think that's an optimistic characterisation. There were investments made by the new government of $500,000 or $1 million to projects of the value of $5 or $7 or $10 million before. These projects were originally $1 million at Brahma Lodge, $1 million at Ingle Farm, $1 million at the Pines and $2.5 million at Hillcrest, for a total investment of $5.5 million in last year's budget. They are now being upgraded to $16 million projects, and I think that I invite the Minister to reflect on whether indeed there was ever any possibility that those projects could be committed for the promised sums at the election, and is it the Department's advice that indeed to deliver what was promised will take 3 times as much money as was in last year's budget?
Well, thank you, Member for Morialta, but I stand by my original answer. I don't have anything further to add.
Missed it by that much. The extensive... Sure, they are good projects. I'm identifying that they are costing a great deal more than the government had suggested. The $25 million of operating expenditure in 23-24 to upgrade, repair or replace assets at 50 metropolitan schools. Did the that's operational funding. Can I clarify, is that attributable to our Gonski spend?
Just a point of clarification, Member for Morialta, are you referring to the 23-24
Yes.
budget announcement?
Yes, it's still on page 26 of Budget Paper 5.
Yeah. Oh, yes. It is counted towards Gonski, it is operating expenditure.
Previously, I've heard the Minister say that the Education Department and governments shouldn't be counting infrastructure money towards their Gonski spend. I note that these $25 million worth of commitments appeared in a press release from the government's talking about its school infrastructure investment. Are these the funds that would usually just be described as the minor works budget within the Education Department?
Yes.
And with that in mind, the list of schools that are benefiting from these minor works, can we have that list, please? And how much, sorry, not just the list of schools, but how much is being allocated to them and what the projects are for?
Happy to take that on notice and provide that information when we can. Mr. Bernardi tells me there's still a little bit, I think maybe a bit of work to do, but we can provide that with you.
Thank you. The business...
Sorry to rudely interrupt. I do have a list. I might, if you're happy, it's not particularly long, I can read it out.
Sure.
Okay. So the first category, which is bitumen replacement and upgrade works, including paving remediation, Adelaide East Education Centre, Alberton Primary, Eastern Flurio, Strathalbyn 7 to 12 campus, Flax Mill School, Peter 7, Madge Sexton Kindergarten, Mary Bywaters Memorial Kindergarten, Pandana campus, Riverton Primary School and Warradale Primary School for an allocation of 3.4. Under bushfire resistance and risk reduction works, a total of $1.1 million shared between Aldgate Primary, Bridgewater Primary and Upper Sturt Primary. Under demolition of aged infrastructure, $300,000 shared between Elizabeth Downs Primary and Wandana Primary. Under proposed works, replacement of heating, cooling and ventilation covering whole of Paralowie School and whole of building at Wyalis Stewart Campus Arta 6. Obviously Paralowie School and Wyalis Stewart Campus Arta 6, $4.7 million. Under roof, gutter and downpipe replacement, an allocation of $4.8 million. Augusta Park Primary, Cummins Area School, Udunda Area School, Newbury Park Primary School, Playford International College, Valley View Secondary College, Madison Park Primary School, Aberfoyle Park High School, Brighton Primary School, Plympton International College, Plympton Primary School, Ranella Primary School. Under structural and geotechnical remediation works, $1.7 million shared between Highgate School, Parafield Gardens High School, Richmond Primary School, Seacliff Primary School, Tintinara Area School, Wallaroo Primary School. Under upgrade, refurbishment or replacement works to toilet facilities, Clarendon Primary School, Craigburn. How much is that one? Oh, sorry, 3.7 million shared between Clarendon Primary School, Craigburn Primary School, Carculturby Area School, Lameroo and District Kindergarten, Manura Primary School, Moonta Area School, Narracourt South Primary School, Paravista Primary School and Wirianda Secondary. Final cohort, asset upgrades and replacements to traffic infrastructure, windows and ceilings, specialist areas and walls and flooring, a total of $5.3 million shared between Balaclava Primary, Ascot Park Primary, Coomanduke Area School, Evanston Gardens Primary School, Henley High School, Lee Creek Area School, Lee Creek Kindergarten, Narracourt High School, North Ingle School, Palmer Primary School, Paracombe Primary and Preschool, Parkside Primary School and Tintinara Area School. I think that's the list.
Thank you for that. Can I ask if we can have on notice the ultimate reconciliation, because some of those will have significant variance between what's required at individual schools within those categories when it is ready?
Once that's finalised, yes.
Thank you very much. What's the status?
Sorry to rudely interrupt again. We've got an answer to a previous question. If that's okay.
Through you, Minister. Earlier, the question was asked about the movement of 387 million. I've worked that out. So that's the difference between the 2022 original budget on page 23, budget paper 3, of $4.106 billion and the estimated result of $4.493 billion, which is a difference of the 387. So the increase in expenditure of that around 387 million since the 2022-23 original budget is primarily driven by the transfer of Skills SA from the Department of Industry for Industry, Innovation and Science to the Department on 1 July 2022, which totalled $378.6 million. The 2022-23 original budget for the training and skills was included in the Department for Industry, Innovation and Science's budget, and following the signing of the CE agreement for the machinery of government change, the budget expense of $378.6 million was transferred from the Department for Industry, Innovation and Science to the Department for Education, effective 1 July 2022.
So it was a $381 million, let's call it a variance from education, and $6 million from skills then?
No, from the variance of 387, which is original budget to the revised budget on page 23, just to clarify.
Trying to clarify with the difference between 387 and 381.
378 of it is skills, related to skills, and the rest would be the other parts of the department.
If there's any further information about the difference between the numbers on page 23 and page 24, beyond that, I'm sure you'll get back to us.
Absolutely, yep.
The next question, just interrupt for a sec. Just to notify the committee that I'll be discharged with immediately, and the member for Elizabeth will be taking my place, and I shall be returning this afternoon.
Honourable members, in the absence of the chair, it's necessary to appoint an acting chair, and I'll call for nominations. There being no other nominations, I declare the member for Elizabeth acting chair.
Morialta.
Thank you, sir. In relation to page 181, the infrastructure,
Time to shine.
the 20 schools that were funded with infrastructure projects last year, I assume they all come under this title of other school projects, Yankalilla, Mawson Lakes, Plympton, or the original Plympton project, the 4 school gyms that we talked about earlier. Can the Minister identify which one of these have been complete, if any, when the others will be completed, how much has been spent on each so far, and when they're budgeted to be upgraded?
I have a list here which I might quickly read in to of projects completed in 2022-2023. Our Tornish Primary School at a budget of roughly $5.9 million. The Australian Science and Mathematics School at a budget of $3 million. Banksia Park International High School at 8.
These aren't the ones that were announced last year. I'm talking about the election commitment ones.
Right, okay. Advise in terms of the election commitment ones to which you refer, they are all still ongoing. Apart from the Mawson Lakes Bridge, and it's good to have the member for Flory here, and who joined me, of course, at the opening of that just last week.
Here.
It's a good bridge.
The business cases for the proposed new schools at the Mount Barker and Adelaide's northern suburbs that the Minister has previously described, where are those business cases up to?
Yes, so I'll pass over to Mr Temple in a second, but as the member for Morialta correctly points out, we have announced that sites that we will need to look at building new schools in the immediate future are Mount Barker, and that work has commenced on business case, and I think I answered possibly in this place to a question, or maybe I took it on notice to the member for Morialta that Infrastructure SA, I think, will get that business case as well to do their work, and the other is a school in the north, which Mr Templey can provide perhaps more detail, but I would anticipate is further out north, given where the growth in areas like Riverlea and those parts of the state are at the moment. But I'll pass over to Mr Templey to give some details on where the business cases are currently at.
So both business cases are close to completion. So we're in the step of the process of commencing the engagement with Infrastructure SA on the analysis that's been undertaken to date. The business cases themselves are quite different. So Mount Barker is much more the traditional business case, looking at demand for schooling and preschooling in Mount Barker itself. The work we're doing in the north is much more expansive, looking at the whole of the northern suburbs, taking in future demographic changes and housing developments. But for both, we anticipate that we'll have advice from the Minister prior to the end of this year.
Thank you. And are there any other new schools at the point of requiring a business case in other growth areas or areas that have experienced significant infill?
Not at this point, Member for Morialta, no.
Thanks. Good.
I think the member for Elder is champing at the bit.
Same budget line item as it's already been discussed. Alongside investing in capital, can the Minister talk about the Every School a Great School initiative recently announced and how it will reduce pressure on schools?
Thank you, Member for Elder for your question, and I'm very pleased to be able to provide some information around that recent announcement. And yes, I think the comments I've made recently publicly have been along the lines of, I think, a predilection that governments of both persuasions have had for a long time now, which is continuing to invest and upgrade and expand what I might characterise as existing schools of choice, and the ones in the shared CBD zone are obvious examples. So are schools like Glenunga and Marriotteville, and I don't in any way mean that as criticism. They are fantastic schools, but I think we have probably sometimes put the job of lifting up those schools that may not be first choice for families that have a large amount of existing capacity, which is unused, in the too hard basket, because the truth is that it is not easy to do that work. It is often, although costly, easier to simply add existing capacity at schools that have very much established demand, in a lot of cases wait lists. So we know that once the existing capacity or the extra capacity is provided, then we know those spots will fill up and those families will be happy. But this initiative is going to focus on, I think, trying to do more in terms of where we prioritise our spending as a department and a government on those schools which need some assistance to perhaps have new infrastructure, which is always part of the equation, as much as we say that what really matters in schools is what happens inside classrooms and the quality of our teaching and learning, and that, of course, is true. It doesn't change the fact that parents will make at least part of their assessment or judgment about where to send their children based on how the school looks and the infrastructure at the school. And the cold hard truth is that there's a lot of stock, despite the work that's been done over a number of years to upgrade our schools. There is a number of stock which hasn't had the same kind of attention, and every time we upgrade a school, build new infrastructure, we probably only compound the issue that is there in terms of the school down the road, which doesn't have the same investment and the choice that families need to make around where they send their kid. So I would point to a couple of examples, I think, around where we have shown that you can lift schools up. One example I would have is Plympton International, which is a pretty incredible story of enrolment growth. I might not have the year correct, but I think around the 2016 kind of mark, there was around 360 odd enrolments, I think. It is now projected to be in the 1,100 vicinity in the not too distant future. Now, there was some zoning changes in there, of course, which probably contributed in some way, but there's been a lot of new infrastructure put there, and it's very impressive. And there is the bilingual language program as well, which I think has proven very popular, and some excellent leadership shown at the school. And I think those things combined have turned around the public perception of the school, and it is now well and truly a school of choice. And of course that's great for a number of reasons. It's great because there's existing capacity there which we could use without building more capacity. It is good because local families get to choose their local school, and there are all sorts of downsides of when that doesn't happen, including families in their minds being forced to trek across town or out of their immediate area to send their kids to a different school, which has an impact on busy people's lives, on traffic and all those sorts of things. But I think it also does a lot to build confidence across the board that families can choose or send their kid to their local school and be confident that they will receive a really high quality, excellent education. The other school in my local patch that I would like to highlight, and it was the subject of a really pleasing article in the Advertiser last week, I think it was, could have been this week, was the Heights School. And I remember when I was just a humble candidate for office, and the calls I always got about the Heights from the community were those who lived closer to Banksia Park International, but were zoned to the Heights, who wished to get their children into Banksia Park because they had heard that the Heights was not a good school and didn't want to send their kids to. And I can tell you now, the school has the zone enforced for the first time, possibly in its history, and the calls I get now are from people who live outside the Heights zone wanting to get their kids into it. And it's a number of things have happened there: STEM lab, new gym, new classrooms, and thank the former minister for continuing those projects as well. Some great leadership there which really turned things around as well, and now school of choice, and one that is getting some well-deserved plaudits for the results that they're getting. So it make every school a great school. It's one of those classic kind of, I guess, government kind of slogans, but it is very true, and I want to, as best I can in the time that I have left in this job, whatever that is, make sure that we do the hard work at those other schools we might identify that fall into that category as just not having had the attention they deserve, and trying to lift them up, because we have a number of examples across the state now where it can work. It takes investment though, it takes a bit of clever thinking around specialisations, and I point to Plympton there, and it takes quality leadership as well. So I'm proud of this initiative, and I hope in years to come we can point to some other schools that might be success stories because of it.
Thank you. Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, page 188, in relation to FTEs. Can the Minister identify how many schools in South Australia are currently seeking to recruit a principal?
That on notice, Member for Morialta.
Thank you. In doing so, can I also add a couple of other categories? In addition to seeking how many schools are currently seeking to recruit a principal, so how many schools have an acting principal and therefore will soon be recruiting? How many schools have a principal in the last year of their appointment with no confirmation as yet that they'll be rolled over? And when will decisions be made relating to principals being rolled over in their appointments?
Happy to take all those on notice and provide an answer to you.
Thank you. If we go to the previous page in relation to country teachers' pre-service programs, actually, I'll start specifically in relation to the extension of country loadings, which the Labor Party had as an election commitment. Previously, country loadings tapered off after 5 years, or there might have been adjustments depending on the circumstances for teachers on those contracts, but the new government promised that teachers in the country would keep those loadings indefinitely. Has that change been made yet, or is it still to be enacted?
Thank you, Member for Morialta. Happy to provide an answer to that question. And yes, you correctly identify one of our election commitments, which is to make the country incentive zone allowance ongoing. And I think the timing of this is obviously important in relation to the member's previous question too around attracting and retaining staff, which is a challenge that is being felt across Australia more than ever before, particularly in the eastern states, I think New South Wales and Victoria, which have a lot of teacher vacancies. And the current state of play, if I could put it that way, is that the CISA, or the country incentive zone allowance, expires after 5 or 8 years, and that depends on the remoteness of the staff member who has attracted that. And we are actually in the process as we speak, or I may even be doing it now, Member for Morialta, announcing that the allowance will become an ongoing payment, which will mean that anyone who's eligible to receive the allowance in the 2024 school year, including those who move to a regional school or preschool for the first time, receive the allowance for as long as they are in the country, and the amount they receive will depend on what zone they fall into. I'm confident that this is going to, of course, it is an election commitment which we must deliver, but I'm confident that it will play a role in attracting more staff to go to the country, which is where we feel those shortages most acutely, and I think also doing something to raise the profile somewhat of the important role that regional or country teachers play, not just at the schools but in the communities that they actually move to. And I remember all too well where I grew up we would regularly have teachers who would come down from Melbourne and stay a few years, and the community loved it, and they might join local sporting clubs, the footy club, and then after a few years they disappear, and the loss wasn't just felt by the students in the school, but it was felt by the whole community. And that is certainly the case in South Australia, where we have a very urbanised population and lots of small regional locations where that issue of attracting and retaining people, I think, is even more acutely felt. So just a little bit of detail that I might put on the record around what the zones pay. Zone 2 is closest to a populated area. Zone 5 is the most remote. Zone 2 is $1,989 in addition per annum. Zone 3, $3,508. Zone 4 is $6,187, and Zone 5 is $10,023 per annum. But beyond the implementation of this election commitment, any further changes to the scope of CISA are being discussed with the AEU as part of the negotiations now for the next enterprise bargaining agreement. And I hope that, depending on how we go with that, I might have some more to say about that in the not too distant future. But at the moment, pleased to announce that it will be operational for those who move to regional schools or preschools for the first time in the 2024 school year.
So to be clear, the program does not include teachers who are in country schools now, or who may even start between now and the end of the year. Those teachers will still be under the original arrangement and will not have indefinite country loadings included in their pay.
At this stage, no, because that wasn't the election commitment, but I'm working on that as part of the enterprise bargaining agreement with the union, in the hope that that might be something we are able to offer.
Who's negotiating the EB with the union? Is that you or the Minister for Industrial Affairs?
It's IRAP, which under the Minister for Industrial Affairs. Or yes, the attorney who is also the Minister for Industrial Affairs. But IRAP handle that.
How many teachers exercised their right of return after teaching in the country for the required period of time last year in 2022? And potentially, if we could have that figure for each of the last 5 years, I will not blame the Minister if he takes it on notice.
Thank you, and yes, I shall.
And does the department have a target for how many teachers will exercise that right this year and next year and so on?
Over to the Chief Executive for that one, if that's okay.
We don't have a target for that, of course. What we want to do is maximise retention of educators in the country. And now the country incentive zone allowance and the announcement made today will support that teacher retention in regional areas.
Can I move to a new budget line, page 189, in the explanation of significant movements? At the top of the page, there's $4.1 million for autism support in schools, which is the difference between the 23-24 budget and the 2022-23 estimated result. At the bottom of the page, there's another $4 million for autism support in schools, which is comparing the 21-22 actual with the 22-23 budget. Am I to take it from this that this $4 million in neither year was included in last year's budget? Or to ask the question a different way, is this $4 million in 22-23 and the $4 million in 23-24, is that effectively the same $4 million in separate years, or is it $4 million in the first year and then $8 million in the second year?
pass to Mr Bernardi.
Thank you.
I'm advised that you're correct. In the first year, it's $4 million, being a half-year impact, and then it grows to $8 million.
That makes a lot of sense, thank you. How much was actually spent in 22-23 on this project?
I would need to come back with that one.
Are you happy to take that on notice, Minister? Happy to take that on notice. Thank you. Are all services that were previously and or currently being provided by Autism SA or other NGOs serving students with autism, are those services being continued? Well, perhaps I can ask a clarifying question. Can the Minister provide a list of all contracts and other financial arrangements between the Department and Autism SA in 21-22 and 22-23? And are any of those services ceasing this financial year or next?
Member for Morialta, and then I might give a few reflections on the program. There have been no changes to funding to Autism SA or any other non-government service providers since the introduction of the autism inclusion teachers, but perhaps an opportunity for just me to talk a little bit about this program. And it was on the 1st of February that I joined the Assistant Minister for Autism, Emily Burke, the Honourable Emily Burke in the other place, and we launched the first network of autism inclusion teachers in public primary schools and creating a network of autism expertise right across the state. $28.8 million over the forward estimates is being provided for to collectively provide each primary school to release a teacher to the role for 1 day a week or 1 day a fortnight, depending on the size of that school. 427 schools have an autism inclusion teacher, and this covers 97% of eligible schools. And I might just take this opportunity to thank those in the department as well as the Honourable Emily Burke for what I thought was some pretty amazing work in a very short period of time. I have to be honest and say my levels of confidence about us finding the staff in that period to commence their work was not high, but I was both very pleased with the work of with the Assistant Minister and those in the department, some of whom are here with me today, to get that done, but also the willingness of teachers who are already incredibly busy to put their hands up and to take on that role. I think that speaks really, really highly of our workforce, and I think it's also an acknowledgement from the workforce that we need to do more in this area. And I've heard the Premier speak on a number of occasions about what led to his desire to do something in this space, and it was born out of 4 years of street corner meetings and town hall style meetings and all that sort of thing, where the Premier said that he was basically inundated with people who came up to him and spoke about a child or a family member with autism that they knew who was struggling in their school setting and not getting the support that adult thought they needed or deserved. And the Premier was overwhelmed by that, and I think he hit the nail on the head in terms of the need for this in the system. It is my desire, and at this stage it is a desire only, to not have this the end of our ambitions with the support we provide students with autism. We will look about whether there are opportunities in the future to increase the loading or provision at those primary schools, because I don't pretend that the current allocation is going to meet all the sort of demand we have out there in the system to assist these students. So it is something that we are watching very closely about its success, and I've been pleased to have the opportunity when visiting sites to speak to the staff member who is performing the autism inclusion role at that site, and it has been largely positive about what they're doing, but certainly, and they have pointed out to me that they in many cases feel there is opportunity or scope for them to do more of that work, and that's something that we will look at in the future.
Thank you. The Minister said there were no changes to any of the arrangements. Can he confirm that, well, perhaps can he provide reassurance that any contracts that end in June 2023, any time-limited contracts relating to this, have been renewed? Contracts or other financial arrangements?
See if I can answer it for you now. If not, I'll take it on notice. Member for my answer, Member for Morialta, is we don't think so, but we can't be 100% sure, so we will come back to you.
Appreciate it, thank you. Can I go to page 179, just the general line about the net cost of providing services? In relation to the government advertising that's been supporting the technical colleges and noting the recent round of government advertising about the Findon Technical College in particular, how much is that advertising costing and who's paying for it?
Yes, happy to get you an answer on that. Perhaps while I'm doing that, Member for Morialta, I've been reminded that in terms of CISA or the Country Incentive Zone Allowance, people who are currently receiving CISA at the moment will also get it ongoing, as well as those who are moving to the country in the time frame. And separate to that is the negotiation that I mentioned with the union around existing country staff who are currently not attracting CISA because they might have timed out. So it'll be new people, but also people currently getting it now will continue to get it under the delivery of the election commitment, and then on top of that there are the negotiations with the union.
So just to be clear, anyone who's currently getting the country allowance will continue to get it, anyone who comes in will get it, and the people who currently don't have an allowance are the group in question?
That is correct.
Okay, that's fair enough. Sorry, government advertising, who's
Yes.
paying for your ads?
So the total amount for the advertising campaign is $1.2 million. It comes out of the funding bucket for the technical colleges, which is Department for Education.
So our Gonski allocation is going towards the money we acquit to the federal government as our contribution towards meeting our Gonski responsibilities includes $1.2 million that are paying for advertisements for Findon High School's enrolments next year and the other technical colleges programs.
Take that on notice, Member for Morialta, and come back to you with an answer.
What is the purpose of the ads?
To build awareness of the tech colleges, to let both prospective students and families know that it is an option. I know in the case of Findon, which will be the first to open, and the principal there, Kathleen Hall, that the advertising has been very well received and something that she has said is important because there is little point in building 5 technical colleges, I think, to a total value of $208 million from memory without, and it is obviously a significant change to the system. I mean, there's nowhere else in Australia from my mind that is doing this at the moment. It's 208.8 investment, 175 capital and 33.8 operating across the 3 years starting from 23-24, with Findon opening term 1 2024. I think it's important that we let families know that this is an option for them. It's something that we want students to take up. It certainly has very broad support, I think, from employee groups, including some like BAE that we have partnered with at Findon, and there'll be more partnerships that we will announce in the not too distant future. So we want students to know that that option will be there for them to move into the Tech College Year 10 and do Year 10, 11 and 12 and then out into the workforce. So I think the purpose of the advertising campaign is to make sure that South Australian families know of the option and start contemplating it now, because really decisions around what students might do in their senior years and beyond are made often at the junior high school level, and those key influences around students like mum and dad or grandma and grandpa are already having those conversations with them around what they think they should do, and they all collectively need to know that our tech colleges will be an option for them.
The Findon Technical Colleges, I think the Minister just confirmed, is looking to be delivering for students in year 10, 11 and 12, and my recollection previously is it'll have a total of 200 enrolments. How many enrolments is it taking next year, and is that just for year 10s or is it for 10s, 11s and 12s?
Member for Morialta, there will be enrolments starting next year for years 10 and 11 at Findon. We anticipate enrolments for 60 year 10s. This is approximate figures because the enrolment process is underway now. 60 year 10 students and 60 year 11 students.
So at $1.2 million for a program that is seeking 120 enrolments, that strikes me as about $10,000 advertising cost per enrolment. Had the department considered any other means of attracting enrolments to Findon's Technical College that might potentially have cost the public education schools budget less money than $1.2 million?
Well, first of all, I don't think that's right, because you're characterising it as being advertising which is only for Findon, which is not right. It's advertising across the state for all 5, because they are all going to be online by 2026, so that process has to start now. So, no, I don't accept that.
We'll move on. Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, page 179 is the workforce summary. In relation particularly to corporate staff, does the department still have a number of staff working from home, the arrangements that started during the pandemic? So especially given the encouragement that the Premier and others have given to get people working in the city again, yes. Does the department have a clear plan and timeline in place for staff who are working from home to return to the office?
Thank you, Member for Morialta. If you're okay with it, I might pass to the Chief Executive to give you an answer on that.
Obviously, our service delivery roles with work performed on site to support students and student learning, those educators, that workforce has always been in schools where possible. They've not been working from home. They've been providing that service, and I think it's been a great credit to those educators that they've continued throughout COVID and some of the challenges where other workers were able to work from home, that they've been able to continue that service and that connection to students wherever possible. And of course, the majority of the department's workforce are in those frontline service delivery roles in our schools and preschools, and now that requires them to work on site. For our central divisions, the department's corporate office rosters are managed within the individual divisions and teams. And that takes account the work performed, the team's operational needs, and the individual's circumstances as well. And I think it's important that we retain that flexibility to respond to the nature of the work, the nature of the operational needs, and the nature of the individual circumstances. We do continue to support working from home arrangements, and we've got platforms, of course, like Teams and our Ed Remote Gateway to make sure that people can retain their productivity when working from home, so because they can access all of our systems remotely. But the responsibility for that, for the day-to-day management of that, sits with employees and managers to ensure that the outcomes, the work outcomes that are required are achieved, and that we manage performance issues wherever they arise. Might just add that, in terms of making sure that we're getting the productivity that we need for our staff, whether they are working remotely or they are working in the department. Any performance issues there that are identified when employees are working from home, then individual rosters are adjusted if need be to ensure the appropriate management oversight. We do have flexible working arrangements beyond working from home for staff, and that's important as well. Work can be provided, so flexi-time, compressed working weeks, purchase leave and job sharing, and those arrangements are managed and monitored locally. And I'd just end by saying the workforce advice that we have regarding flexible working arrangements always aligns with guidance from the Commissioner for Public Sector Employment.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. Can I ask if there are, if you have any data, and obviously happy for you to take it on notice if it's not readily to hand, but on the current proportion of staff working from home, particularly out of these corporate roles, and staff working in the office, and has that proportion changed over the last year?
So through you, Minister, I'll make best endeavours to get that data available because it's managed locally and that flexibility is applied. It might not apply in the long term and it might be difficult to get that data exactly, but I'll make best efforts to get that for you.
Thank you.
All right, I might turn to the member for Florey.
Question is, can the Minister provide the committee with examples of how the government is helping South Australian families with the cost of living?
Thank you, Member for Florey, for your question. I'm very happy to provide you an answer about some of the initiatives that the government has put in place, and we all know here, as I'm sure the members for Elder and Playford and Unley and Frome and Morialta would, about cost of living biting at the moment. There is absolutely no doubt about that. And it's certainly something that I hear as a local member more and more, and I think we have to take into account what we can do in all parts of government, including education, to try to give a bit of cost of living relief to families. And I think one of the great traps in this job, Chair, is given the very, very generous, well, I think very generous pay that we receive as members of Parliament and ministers, it is very easy to get out of touch with what everyday working families, elderly, vulnerable South Australians have to contend with, and how to us sometimes what we might perceive as relatively small amounts of money can be an incredible block to them being able to lead healthy, active and happy lives. And the materials and services charge, which is the amount of money paid to attend a public school in South Australia, I think is a very good example of that. It is not what you would describe probably as a large sum of money given what could be spent on one's education, but the election commitment that we made, and it was matching the former government on this, to have a rebate of $100 for each child off the materials and services charge, I think has been really welcomed by families, and is a reminder to us all in this place about how even what might be in the scheme of things not a huge amount of money can be very welcomed and important for families. And I think, I don't have it in front of me, but from recollection, the set materials and services charges in the primary school setting is something like $269 or $270 per child. In the high school setting, it's about $355. Schools can raise that with agreement of governing council and parent body, and some schools do that, but a lot do not. So the rebate that we have provided both last year and now this year, and we will be providing again, provides $100 off, which, if you have 2, 3 or 4 children at school, very quickly becomes a considerable amount of money. So I'm pleased that we have continued it. If I were to be very frank with you, at the time that we committed to it or matched the then government's commitment, I wondered about whether or not that $12 million would be the best bang for buck that we could get, because it's quite a blunt instrument. I'm now very, very glad that we did commit to it and are continuing it, because the more families I speak to who some, of course, are not comfortable in having that conversation, but some are and have been quite honest with me about the difference it has made to them. Of course, the other notable thing that we have done, and I was with the member for Elder at Clovelly Park Primary School when we announced this, which was more money for Kickstart for Kids and Food Bank for school breakfast. So I was joined by the member for Elder and the Premier on that day, and we were able to serve some of the kids breakfast, and they joined us in preparing the toast and putting the Vegemite and jam on. And we spoke to the principal there as well, who's a very impressive person. And what we have done is a $6.5 million boost to the program. And I think before that boost, those two excellent organisations, Kickstart for Kids and Food Bank, and we were joined on that day by Ian Steele, were funded by the government to provide something like 400,000 breakfasts across the system across 4 years. This funding will mean that that will be increased to 1.4 million. It will mean in some cases that schools that don't offer a breakfast program will be able to offer a breakfast program, and those like Clovelly Park Primary School that offer one but not every day, I think will be able to increase their offering. So there's a couple of examples I think I would give. I think there's one here that is not mentioned in my notes, and I'm sure someone next to me will correct me if I'm wrong, but we might have done something around the threshold or indexation level on school card. I think not a huge change, but enough hopefully to enable some families with multiple children to be eligible for the school card amount, which is another important thing. And if you look at the school card, annual school card income limits, again, I think this is a very strong reminder about how tough some people are doing it to gain access to the school card in the 2023 school year with one child or one dependent child. The annual school card income gross limit is $66,412, and then going up to 5 children at $71,156, and I think that's combined gross family income. So it gives you, and we have a number of families, of course, who access that, which I think goes to show that there are people out there doing it tough, getting by on very small incomes, and that's why things like school card and breakfasts and the materials and services rebate are important.
I'll use the general expenses line on page 188 for the next few questions. What attendance data does the department currently require schools to provide to head office, and how many chronic truancy referrals has the department received so far this year? And how does that compare to previous years?
Thank you, Member from Rialto. I'll give you as much detail as I can, and I'm happy to take anything else that over and above that. Truancy, perennial issue, of course, particularly around the use of the powers under the Act in terms of prosecution, which you and I both know, having been involved in discussions in this place around legislation and potential changes to the Act, is not always as easy to use as one might like. I think it's fair to say, pushed the agency very hard in my first sort of 18 months on using it in cases where we think it is valid, because my concern is not, my concern is more that if we have provisions in legislation like the ability to prosecute parents who are actually playing an active, deliberate role in preventing their kids from going to school, and politicians like myself go out and talk about it, but then we never use it, people wise up really fast and realise that it's a paper tiger and is never going to be used. And so my point has been, I'm not asking the department to be out there prosecuting people willy-nilly left, right and centre, but there are legitimate cases, as the member from Rialto and I both know, because we've been privy to them, where parents have actually actively done things to stop kids going to school, and in those cases I want the Act to be used to take appropriate action against them, but to make it clear to others out there who might be contemplating similar action to know that we are prepared to use it. So currently there are 3 cases involving 5 children that are with Crown for advice on prosecution. There are a further 25 cases that involve 39 children, which are under what I would describe as close scrutiny of the department. We're working on these cases to try to get the kids back to school. That is the best outcome. I support that outcome. I'm not here saying to the department I don't care whether or not we can get them back to school in another means or not, throw the book at them. I'm saying when all those things have been exhausted, then it is time to use the Act. Previous cases under consideration, not all, or some haven't progressed to prosecution because we've successfully re-engaged the kids, which is good. And obviously sometimes the Act and the provisions within it are useful because once families realise that we are actually going to pursue it to the letter of the law, all of a sudden behaviour changes and the kid comes to school. That is the best outcome.
The main purpose of the changes to the Act.
Yes, indeed, that is correct. That's right. And we know that this stuff is really complex and there's often all sorts of stuff going at home around. There might be child protection involvement, there might be, could be drug use, alcohol, domestic violence, all sorts of things. And the poor kid, of course, it's another reason why we need to do everything to get them to school. I would say, and I'm happy to provide, if we find it, more specific data, but most students attend school regularly. There are a small number who are absent from school a lot. There's a range of reasons for that. Attendance at school is important for learning. It's also about socialising. It's also, as I just mentioned, for those kids that might be from a troublesome home environment, to give them some respite from that and to have the eyes of other adults on them to be able to see how they're going and refer them to other support services or authorities if that is necessary. And I might pass now. I am told that the Chief Executive has a bit more detail. If you're okay, I'll pass to the Chief Executive to provide that.
I'll provide you on notice with the data, some of the specific data, because as you say, schools from all 3 sectors are required to provide attendance data, and I'll give you the breakdown of that. But just some broader attendance rates. Attendance rates for reception to Year 12 from 2021 and 22 were 87.0, 88.9 and 84.5% respectively. And earlier than that, between 2010 and 2019, attendance rates were pretty steady between 90 and 91%. So this is something that we're really concerned about. South Australian attendance data for government schools certainly aligns with the rates recorded in government schools nationally, and that reduced attendance rate linked to COVID we've seen in all of the states and territories. That breakdown of the 84.5% attendance rate in 2022 has got 11.5%, was the result of 11.5% authorised absences and 4% unauthorised absences. So those unauthorised absences being where no parental improvement is received by the school and there's no explanation for why the student is absent. So those authorised absences are the ones that continue to be the majority of absences than they were through COVID, and we're still seeing that now. We've started to see some early signs that attendance in 2023 may be better than 2022, but the attendance rate still remains below the 2021 and COVID-19 related absences we're still seeing in our system. So it's too early to tell whether those current attendance rates reflect any broader impact on school attendance that's going to go beyond COVID. So we really we've got a number of projects and processes to support attendance and really get those students back to school.
Thank you. Can I ask, in relation to those families, and the Minister gave us some helpful figures earlier, but those families that aren't engaging or are acutely being scrutinised by the Department, is the education family conferencing model being used to engage with those families, and how many students have been referred for an education family conference perhaps each year over the last couple of years since the introduction of the conferences?
Working backwards, I'll get the number for you. Are they being used? Absolutely. Can they be effective? Absolutely. So I know the member for Morialta knows how these work all too well. but I will, just perhaps for the rest of those present today, voluntary, independently mediated meetings between family, schools and other professionals. They have a strengths-based approach to support families and children to have a voice in developing strategies to improve the school attendance. They are an important step. They are certainly still being used, and I absolutely support that, because as I think we all agree in here, the best outcome is that we find a way for students to get back to school without things like punitive measures like prosecution, but I will get the data on how many of those for the member Morialta.
Thank you. Going to page 188 is FTEs is basically the budget line. So questions in relation to staffing issues. Does the department's modelling of projected supply and demand of teachers over the next few years show over the next 3 years per se show increasing shortages of teachers relative to demand?
Laura Schonfeld to come in. Chair, could I perhaps ask Laura Schonfeld, who's the Executive Director for People and Culture, to sit in the stead of the Chief Executive and provide an answer to the member for Morialta?
An outstanding suggestion.
Thank you. Our team work with schools and preschools across the state to do planning for their workforce profiles over the coming years. What we've been doing over the last number of years is working with schools to see how far out they can forecast their staff profiles. So many of the things that contribute to staff profiles aren't known significantly far in advance, because you'll understand that sometimes teachers will make decisions about their retirement or their personal situations, for the coming year. What our profiling shows at the moment is that the situation's relatively stable. We've got shortages in some areas, mainly in specialist secondary subjects, and for some country locations that are particularly hard to fill and have always been harder to fill. What we're doing is we're working with programs like Teach for Australia to make sure we can close some of those secondary gaps, and those programs that are designed to get teachers out to those hard to fill locations. What we're seeing with our initial teacher education numbers is they're moving, but we're not 100% sure what the impact of COVID will be on that. So we're working through this, the ATWD data that we've recently got to understand what's the future pipeline look like. I wouldn't at this point say we're seeing a significant change. That was your question in the teacher pipeline for South Australia at this point, but we are consciously monitoring it and making sure that we're understanding what it will look like in the out years, because we know that it takes, at the moment, 4 years to take an undergraduate teacher through an initial teacher education program, or if we're using programs like Teach for Australia, where we can get them in and work with them through employment-based pathways.
I'm sure, Minister, that you would have heard, I'm sure the Executive Director and other staff would have seen, staff would have heard when talking to principals that recruitment is increasingly an anxiety that they feel, and teachers and principals in inner metropolitan schools have applicants for every position, but potentially fewer applicants of high quality than they used to. And the sites that Laura Schonfeld identified in the country, or for specialist secondary subjects, that is exacerbated further. Does the department have an assessment of the numbers of vacancies that its schools are carrying at the moment, and is there any assessment of what trend that is likely to be in the coming years? Perhaps I can ask a broad question that may capture all of it. How's the department planning to manage this risk?
Thank you, Member from Murray Alta, and it's a very good and fair question and something that is on the minds of everyone at this table. Certainly on my mind, and I watch what has happened or is happening in New South Wales and Victoria in particular, where there are, one of the figures given to me about New South Wales was 3,000 unfilled teacher spots, and I would very much not like us to get anywhere near that. And I can tell you at the moment, as at week 7, term 2, 51 teaching vacancies across the system. They are there for a range of reasons, including unable to fill a role previously advertised, as the member for Murray Alta identified, backfilling leave, backfilling resignations or retirements, backfilling where a teacher has been seconded to another role. So we're at 51. So I don't like to see any in, as Laura mentioned. We are working with Teach for Australia where we can to fill some of those hard-to-fill spots, but we are certainly in a much better position than the eastern states currently. I don't take that for granted, though. We have to keep doing the work, and perhaps I could mention one of the election commitments, which the member for Murray Alta was probably going to touch on anyway, around specialist teachers, which we are still doing work on. We're confident we will deliver it, but we're doing a lot of work with stakeholders at the moment around what that might look like, because yes, it's obviously important, but we are trying to do it at a time where we have particular and acute issues around attracting people to be teachers for reasons that we all know. I would point to...
That's right, you've got 2.5 years to get it done.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, but I want to have it done as soon as we possibly can, because of course every year that goes past where a student doesn't have a specialist teacher is not a good thing for their education. But there are job opportunities out the wazoo. Not sure if that's a parliamentary term or not. But that's just I don't personally take credit for that. It's just the facts, and it is a harder value proposition to put to people now than it's ever been to say you should be a teacher, despite the fact that there is a good solid starting wage of around $75,000 in the public system. I think it's around that in the non-govs as well, when there are all these other job opportunities out there that pay the same, possibly more, and they don't have the stress and workload that teaching does. So that's what we're up against, but the department's doing some, I would describe it as actually really exciting work around teaching the country, which is good. A concierge service, as we are calling it, which is actually working with young teachers who are going out to do their initial teacher education and their placements to help them in terms of finding somewhere to live. We've connected them with other students who are going to the same place. It might be Port Augusta, and we have done a few social events. I was at a thing at Sprout Kitchen in Mile End recently, where they had the whole group in and they took them through a bit of an exercise, which was probably just as much about getting to know each other as it was teaching them to cook a few meals. But one of the things that the Chief Executive said to me not long after both of us took our jobs, which has stuck with me, and I said, what can we do to attract people to go to the country? And the point he raised, which hadn't really struck me, was when we talk to those young people who might be inclined to go and do that, any housing stock that we have, which is obviously incredibly difficult to actually find anyway at the moment because of issues around rental availability, is not what you would describe as fit for purpose for perhaps a young man or woman who would like to maybe share live with another young man or woman, so they have support and all that kind of stuff. They are still built for nuclear families, which was what I lived in when I was born, when my dad was a teacher at Hawkesdale in country Victoria, and we lived in the teacher's property, which was a little 3-bedroom weatherboard thing, which is probably still used by the school. But unless we do innovative things to attract people into country areas, like the example Martin gave, I fear we're not going to be successful. But I guess what I want to say is that we are contemplating in doing those, and the teaching the country concierge stuff that we're doing, I think, is a great example of that.
In relation to the recruitment processes that Victoria is doing, there may be other states where they're giving people substantial sums of money to relocate. Do we have any data on how many South Australian teachers we've lost to Victoria or interstate as a result of those recruitment policies?
Yes. And I've made the point at the National Education Ministers meeting in front of those jurisdictions that have done that about how incredibly disappointing I think it is that we aren't working together to grow the pie instead of trying to nick each other's teachers. Nonetheless, Victoria have well and truly gone down that path. I just spoke to Ms Schonfeld, who's not aware of any. I don't know if we collect data, but I've asked the question on a number of occasions. We're not aware of any. I'm aware of one, I think, who might have called into 891. That person may not have been a public teacher, but I got a feeling, given that I grew up there, that they might have moved from the southeast, South Australia to southwest Victoria, which is possibly a Mount Gambier to Portland move, to attract the extra money, but that's all we're aware of. I've had no feedback or any indication that we are losing teachers at this stage to Victoria's disappointing attempts to take our staff.
Oh, do you want to go there? In relation to Labor's election commitment to, and I quote, increase the percentage of permanent teachers by at least 10%, has the Minister or Department yet worked out what are the parameters the government's setting itself to achieve that commitment? For example, are we talking about between March 22 and March 26? Last year the Minister said, I'm not going to give you a figure now, but there's work being done now. I'm sure once that work is done we'll be able to say more on that. So a year later, has that work been done? What are the parameters for the Labor Party fulfilling its election commitment on increasing percentage of permanent teachers?
Thank you, Member for Morialta, and I do have some detail on this. And again, I would say this is might go to the genesis of it. The reason we have said by at least 10% is because there was, at the time of us being in opposition, there may still well be a disagreement between the union and the department on what levels of permanency in the system are. So to avoid a silly game of semantics, we committed to at least 10%.
I'm not sure you've succeeded if that was the goal.
We shall see. Nonetheless, I think it is a very important election commitment now more than ever, because we've already spoken about the about size of the country incentive zone allowance and its importance, but another part of that is permanency and trying to convert those who are on contracts to permanency when they are people that we want to have long term in the system. And it has started, I can say. We have started the process of meeting the election commitment and increasing the rates of permanency in the system. Based on 12,182 permanent teachers as at June 2022. To deliver on this commitment, the Department will employ 1,218 more teachers permanently within this term of government, being a 10% increase. This commitment includes preschool teachers. That was something I pushed for myself, and I can tell you I am very glad that we did that, and it's on track to be delivered within this term of government.
Thank you. So the department is defining the commitment as 12,000 to being increased by 10% of the base number. I note the election commitment was to increase the percentage of permanent teachers. Can I ask then, what is the current percentage of the department's teaching workforce that hold permanency? Last year, I think the Minister reported the department said it was about 80%.
I'll take that on notice, Member for Morialta, and get you an answer on that.
Thank you. On page 187, there are highlights and targets to the technical colleges. Last year, we discussed the need to work collaboratively across sectors, particularly with regard to the proximity of Findon and the Catholic education system's Western Technical College being so close. Can the Minister advise what progress he has made towards that collaboration?
Yes, your recollection is correct, and I've met, of course, with the representatives of the Catholic system, Chief Executive Neil McGoran and the recently departed Chair of the Board, Mr Dennis Ralphs, about that. The last conversation I had, which I think might have been the last meeting I had with Mr Ralphs before he retired, we discussed this, and I think I'm accurate in saying that they felt we had met our commitment and done a good job of protecting Western Tech from, in some way, cannibalising their enrolments by what we are going to offer or will be offering at Findon. And I've said on a number of occasions publicly that if these tech colleges are to play the role that we envisaged for them and are to increase people moving into the professions in vet pathways that are in such dire demand, there's no point us setting up tech colleges which just take or diminish enrolments from the existing Catholic ones like Cardine, Western Tech and St Pat's, and we made deliberate decisions around what was offered at Findon to do that, and I believe we are meeting that. On the same, on the flip side of the coin, at Port Augusta, we have had representations from the Catholic system there who would very much like to have access to our tech college, and I think we have Claire, who is here, Fleshjack, who has done some superb work on designing these things. I think we have a model where we can do that, and it was my ambition with these that they are not cookie-cutter technical colleges which are the same. They will not only offer different courses, they will potentially be flexible and nimble enough to change their specialisations in the future should that be needed. And I think one of the things that spelt the death knell for the old tech colleges, and I went to one in Victoria that became a secondary college, was they were totally and utterly locked in to what they offered forever. My tech college was automotive, woodwork and metalwork, and because of the way it was set up, it could never do anything else. And when the demands of Portland and the southwest changed, it was no longer relevant. And if we do the same thing with these 5 in 10 years, we're going to be saying they're not producing the graduates that we need. That goes as well to meeting the commitment the Premier gave around making sure that particularly the regional tech colleges like Port Augusta and Mount Gambier are tech colleges for the whole area. They're for the Limestone Coast and they are for the Upper Spencer Gulf. And that means in terms of Port Augusta that we have a flexible enrolment model where non-government students will get who may wish to, will be able to get access where that's what those systems desire.
Thank you. How many students from local public schools have taken up the opportunity to engage with the Western Technical College that the Catholic Education offers for all schools from all sectors? And has the Minister discussed this opportunity with local public principals to ensure they're familiar with it?
Perhaps I could be bold and jump ahead to what I think the member is, in a very respectful and polite way, getting at, which is representations, no doubt, that we have both had from the Catholic system that there has been comments or action taken by some of the public school staff around the Western Tech area to dissuade public students from using Western Tech, and I can say that conversations have been had with those schools to make sure that the principals and therefore student body are aware of the option, and to make sure that we are not taking some kind of active step to prevent them from accessing it, and I support that. And just like I support making sure that what we are providing at Findon is complementary, and I think to the offering at Western Tech, which is important, and I feel like I've certainly made good on that commitment. I've been very strong in my comments with Mr Westwell and Ms Feschuk around that this is about growing the pie. It's not about taking enrolments. And I've got to give a shout out here to the ever-present Danny Deptula from St Pat's, who I think is at every single event I go to, and probably the member for Morialta too.
He's a great man.
He's a very good person, and I've said to him, caught up with him recently and said, what you have done at St Pat's in no small way is the inspiration for what we are trying to do in the public system, but it is to complement you, and I don't want to do anything which diminishes the amazing tech college you have created out there in the northern suburbs.
Thank you. Can I go to languages? Will the government continue to provide support to Unley High School, Nord International, Aberfoyle Park and Roma Mitchell to enable them to continue offering the International Baccalaureate diploma pathway for their senior secondary students? I note that the entrepreneurial strategy extra funding was seen as a time-limited program by the government, and that ends at the end of this year. Does the IB program face a similar fate?
Well, let me, before I pass to Martin Westwell, perhaps just talk about the entrepreneurial programs. And yes, time-limited funding, but I'm reassured that all the sites that were doing it are going to continue doing it, and that is a good thing, and I support that. I have not taken a flamethrower to anything yet, because I have, there's always the flamethrower in the kit bag, but it's not really my style, as I think the member for Morialta knows, and I've made it clear that things that the former government did which worked should be kept and built on, and if there is advice I receive from the department about things that need to be changed, I'll take that into account. But I didn't charge in and say, right, we're going to blow up those entrepreneurial schools, because they weren't my idea.
There's a lot of kids in those schools.
Yeah, exactly, and the feedback I've got is it's positive, but I have gone back, particularly after you asked me the question in question time, I think, just to be absolutely rock solid that they have worked and will be continued in a strong fashion. I'm told absolutely they are, but in terms of the other detail, I might pass to the Chief Executive.
Languages remain a priority for us in public education. It's interesting to note that when students get to year 12 and looking at stage 2 of the SACE, there's a very wide range of language offering at stage 2 that students in the public system take up. And so the number of languages available in the public system is more than double that available in the independent or Catholic schools. It's interesting to note that in the Catholic schools, almost every Catholic school offers Italian, for example. So it's very much connected to the culture. Almost no, in fact, I might almost no. Well, I mean, I'll say definitively no, but almost no independent school offers Italian. And a range offer German, but they tend to be the Lutheran schools. In public education, what we find is a really wide range representing that strength of diversity that we've got in public education around languages. And we want to support that. We want to make sure that, our students from that range of backgrounds that come into public education can find that sense of belonging through studying their own language, through being successful and sharing their expertise in their own language with other students, as well as the benefits that come from language learning. I'm really keen that our students are not just learning a target language, but we're also setting them up to be learners of language, so that they have that confidence when they go into the out-of-school lives as young people and then beyond school as they make that transition, that they're able to go out with the confidence of being language learners and being able to develop that as they need to in their futures. And so as part of that, the schools in the public system that have got the International Baccalaureate will continue to support those.
Thank you. Can the Minister advise if the new government will continue the work that was underway prior to the election in relation to the MOU with the Italian consul to support Italian language teaching in South Australian in South Australia?
from Morialta, I might hand over to the Chief Executive to give you an answer on that question.
So, again, this is something that's important for us in South Australia. It's a really important relationship. That agreement has been signed. We're in the process now of the implementation. Want to make sure that this is going to make the biggest difference, add value for us in South Australia, for our students in South Australia. And so there have been no changes to that programme. Of course, you know, things have been interrupted by COVID and so on, but still working towards implementing that without any significant changes.
Thank you. In relation to page 180, there's an agency output about vulnerable learners. Has the Department for Education maintained its plan of action with the Department for Child Protection? And if so, I might ask a long question and then you can either answer it or take it on notice as you wish. What actions is the department undertaking as a result of this work, and does the Minister engage with the Minister for Child Protection in particular about those students who are supported, who have been supported by this work, if it is still happening?
I'll just remind members we have less than a minute to go, committee.
I won't be offended if the Minister takes this one on notice.
We will take the substantive part of it on notice, but in terms of engagement between me and the Minister for Child Protection, yes, and I'm the Minister responsible for the Child Death Serious Injury Review Committee as well, so I still have a lot of engagement, I guess, in child protection matters in that capacity, but in terms of your broader question around that program, then I'm happy for us to get you a far better answer than the one I could provide you in the small amount of time remaining.
One last question?
Yeah, one last
and
question.
it fits in very neatly with the last one. How many children under guardianship are in a public school system currently? And indeed, is the... well, I'll leave it at that.
You may want to take that one on notice, Minister, since you're cognizant of the time.
We can get you that, but we'll take it on notice. Thank you, Member.